My name is Alex Snicker. I'm the president of Liberty First Network. And what we are is we are a liberty lobbying organization. We go up to Tallahassee, speaking to the elected officials, trying to advance good pieces of legislation and trying to stop bad pieces of legislation. Now, the model that we utilize in order to do this is a twofold model, maybe a little bit different than what a normal lobbying organization would do. Seeing as how what we're doing is not going to get any big companies to give us any money, nor that we want any from them, what we do is a two-pronged approach. We have people in Tallahassee that are up there lobbying on the legislation, but then we also have the grassroots. People from across the state that either, that agree with what we're trying to do up there, that will call their representatives at the appropriate time to try to either stop bad legislation or to promote good legislation and get that through. And really what we try to do more than anything else is to give you all the information that's going on up there in a very clinical way and let you make your own decisions as to whether you think it's a good piece of legislation or whether you think it's a bad piece of legislation. I think that a lot of times, matter of fact, the first time I went up there with them, the first thing that I thought was, boy, if everybody knew what was going on up here, we'd probably get things done a lot quicker. Because to realize what they're doing, the making of the sausage or the making of the legislation, if you understood the process in and of itself, it'd be a lot easier for us to be able to fix things. So what we try to do is to give you all the information that you need, so when you do call your representative about something, you're knowledgeable about the issue, and then you can speak intelligently upon the issue, to where it's not just giving you, say, tell them to vote yes on this or tell them to vote no on this. What we want to do is to give you all the information of what yes and no means, and then you can call them up. That way, when you have a discussion with one of the politicians up there, you're able to get past the, for lack of a better term, used car salesman aspect, and get into a much more real discussion with the politician. So we follow the bills from beginning to the end. And the first thing that we're going to be doing today is to actually just give you an overview of the legislative process. One of the things that we feel is that making sure that you know how a bill becomes a law is probably one of the most important things that we could actually tell you about before we get into anything that's currently going on right now. But for that part, I'll leave it up to Danielle Alexandre to start. Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. So there's actually a 10-step process on how a bill becomes a law. Now, what we do with our organization is try to educate you on all of the issues that we're working on or that we feel are important to liberty within the state. In the state legislature only, we don't deal with any of the federal government. So knowing the process helps you better understand why we're telling you to do things at certain times so that you can be the most effective with your representatives. So a group of citizens, a lobbyist, politicians have an idea for a piece of legislation, and they bring that idea to a member for consideration. What most people don't realize here is that a lot of legislation is actually citizen-driven. A citizen will go to their elected official and say, I have a problem here, and you have to do something. And then the legislators all kind of look at each other and say, well, do you know what to do? Well, no, I don't know what to do. Do you know what to do? And all of them kind of get together and say, well, we have to do something because everybody's mad, so here's something. And a lot of times that something has unintended consequences for someone else, who then goes to their representative saying, you have to do something. And that's how we kind of get into this snowball effect of regulation upon regulation upon regulation, where by the end it doesn't make any sense anymore. But when they bring that idea to a member is actually a term that we commonly use in Tallahassee for a state house rep. So a lot of times you'll see signs in Tallahassee if you come up there that'll say, this area is for members. Or, you'll hear us talk about in Tallahassee, well, did you speak to the member about that? And so a lot of times it gets confusing, and I brought people up to Tallahassee, they'll say, did I miss my membership card? How do you become a member of this? But that's actually what we call a state house rep. They're all called members, and then a senator is still called a senator. So that's what, kind of some of the slang terms up in Tallahassee that we use. So then it has to go into what's called bill drafting. So a legislator is the only one that can submit an idea into bill drafting. And then this could be submitted as a general idea or a very specific piece of legislation. And even legislation that's pre-written, a lot of times, and even this year, I submitted a pre-written piece of legislation. It was word for word exactly how it needed to be. But that still had to go into bill drafting because they actually make sure that every single word is going into the statute where it belongs, even if it's completely written. But even when we give them a general idea, they research the statutes that it would go in best, and then they write up the legislation to make it do exactly what you wanted it to do. So who works in bill drafting? Well, bill drafting is actually made up of an independent staff. They don't work for any specific legislator, they don't work for any specific party, they don't even really work for leadership. They don't work for the Speaker of the House or the Senate President. They're really an independent body. They work for the people of Florida to make sure that when you go with an idea, when a legislator goes with an idea, that they make sure that the wording of that idea is exactly the way it should be to get that done in the statutes. Because reading the statutes is a little complicated, and even some of the best attorneys that I've known have an issue reading legislation. So these people are dedicated to just drafting up legislation.
Now, one thing to note here, though, is that just because, let's say you went to your representative and you said, I want you to do something about this, and he said, well, I submitted that into bill drafting for you. Now, if he simply just said that, sometimes if you don't know better, you get the idea that, oh, he's going to sponsor this bill and he's going to work it through. All he did was put it to the first step he could possibly do. It's not a bad thing that he did it, but knowing that that's what he did and not inferring what he did is a big key here.
Now, bill drafting does have a deadline. So, and for this session, we've already passed it. The deadline for this session was January 25th, but it's always towards the end of January. So anything that was an idea before, if it didn't get into bill drafting by the January deadline, it's not going to happen this year. So anything new that people come up with and say, oh, I want this law written, oh, I want this law written, that's not going to happen this session because we've already hit the deadline for bill drafting.
For the whole year?
For the whole year. So
For the whole session.
It'll start again next year.
Okay.
So once we get through bill drafting, that's when we have to have a sponsor. So each piece of legislation needs a sponsor before it can move on to the next phase. It's important to get a good sponsor for legislation that will work for the bill. And this is where what Alex was saying is important. A lot of times citizens go up to their representative and say, I have this idea, and the representative says, great, we'll put it into bill drafting. And then you go away and he goes, great, we're done with that. But then you have to really, that's what our job is at the Liberty First Network, is to have a great piece of legislation and get a sponsor. A sponsor has to be the legislator. We have to have one in the House. We also have to have one in the Senate. And so that's what we do, is go and actually sell legislation, not financially, but kind of sell it to them. That's where we say, this is why this would be a good idea. This is why your constituents would be behind it. And this is why we need this legislation. So that's when we go and we get a sponsor. And then once we get sponsors, then we try to get more as co-sponsors. But there's also some limitations on sponsorship. A bill is sponsored by the legislators, but in the House, each member can only sponsor 6 pieces of legislation. Now in the Senate, they have an unlimited amount of legislation that they can sponsor. So it's very easy to get a Senate sponsor, but it's very difficult to get a House sponsor, because a lot of times they have their own projects that they wanted to get done, and they're limited to those 6. So we work very hard to get a House sponsor first, and to really push our legislators in the House to get behind good legislation, because we know that those spots fill up fast, which is one of those things where we say that, the session is basically, we have the 60 days, which is coming up from March until April, but we actually started at the end of last session. And then, of course, because it was an election year, we started right as November 4th hit. We knew who won the election, so now we were trying to get House sponsors. So the session, while it technically ends, for lobbyists, it never ends, because you're always working on the House to try to get sponsors for good legislation.
Now, one thing I wanted to know with your question is that as soon as this session is over, then putting things into bill drafting for the next session, for the 2016 session, will start right away. So you're looking at like May or June, when you're going to start putting the stuff in for the next time. And they will get started right away.
And now this also has a deadline. All legislation has to be sponsored by the first day of session. Now, senators get a little longer. Our House members have until this year, it's February 25th, to sponsor. They have to have all their bills sponsored by February 25th, but the senators do get until the day before the first day of session, so they have until March 3rd. So after we get a sponsor, then it goes to the first reading. The legislation has a bill number announced, the sponsors are announced, and a short summary paragraph is read by publication in the House or Senate Journal. Now we say read or announced, but it's not really, nobody's reading it out loud, nobody's doing that. What it is just published in the journal. And at the time of the first registration, a piece of legislation will also get committee assignments and subcommittee assignments. And we'll go into that process a little later, but so we say, why is legislation read, especially if we're not even reading it? According to the Florida Constitution, a piece of legislation must be read 3 times before being voted on by the entire floor. So we're really just kind of working the procedures, and that's why we have to go through that first reading. So this is the most important step in the process, and this is committees. The Speaker of the House and the Senate President are tasked with giving each piece of legislation the committee assignments. That's what's done in that first reading. The piece of legislation has to be heard in every single committee that it's assigned to, and it has to be voted on favorably by that committee before moving on to the next one. The amendments are made during this process as well. So what happens here is that we have a piece of legislation, and it goes into committee. So we may have 3 committee assignments. It has to have 2. Most legislation will have 3. Now it has to be done in order. So if it's supposed to go through the Education Committee, and then the Transportation Committee, and then the Rules Committee, we have to start with the Education Committee first. And and the committee chair sets his own calendar, or her own calendar. So they're the ones that will decide whether it can even be heard in committee. And then it moves on through the process, and what happens most often is amendments will change it. So any legislator on the committee can actually sponsor an amendment to change the legislation. This is how great bills become really bad, and bad bills can become really great. And so that's what we work on, and the amendments happen very quickly. Last year I was working on a piece of legislation where so many amendments were coming in the same day that I was sending out emails to all of our network members that this may change the wording, this may change it. We had 6 in one day because that's how fast the amendments were coming. But so who's on these committees and subcommittees? The committees and subcommittees are actually made up of the legislators. So your House reps, your senators all sit on certain committees. And they're the ones hearing the legislation as it goes through this process, and they're also the ones changing the legislation as it goes through this process. This is a long process. It takes up most of the session. So this is what generally we're doing for most of the session is sitting in on committee meetings. There's always a public comment allowed. So we're up in Tallahassee a lot advocating for the grassroots position on a certain piece of legislation. So then we get to the second reading. So when the piece of legislation has to be put on the special order calendar for the second reading. During this time, the entire floor of the State House or State Senate can ask questions, debate the issue at hand, or propose amendments. So how does it make it onto the special order calendar? Well, the special order calendar is actually voted on by the Rules and Calendar Committee. So even after we've gotten through every single committee, looking at the amendments, the bill has changed quite drastically by this time. We then have to get it to another committee that will say, yes, we will let this be heard on the floor. No, we will not let this be heard on the floor. Then it will be heard on the floor. The legislators can still change it. They can vote on amendments. It can still be changed here. And they'll still be they'll give a preliminary vote, and then it'll move on to the next part of the process.
Now, one thing to note on the other side, what we did before when it comes to the committees, a lot of times when we send out the action alerts, we're sending out to speak with certain representatives, but none of those representatives many times are actually your representative. The reason that you call on those people is because that's the committee it's being heard in. So you want to be specific and targeted in who you're talking to, because to call your representative for a bill that's in a committee that representative isn't in doesn't do you a lick of good. It just doesn't do you any good because they're not going to be voting on it, and they have an easy out. They go, well, I'm not really voting on that, but I'll keep your thoughts in mind. But you're doing a great job. Here's my cell phone number. That's the kind of talk that you'd hear from a representative. However, that's why we call on the specific ones at specific times. So when you do see action alerts, if you happen to get them, and you see who we're telling you to call on, Those are specifically the people that you want to talk to. So we get to the third reading, sorry.
Okay. So after the second reading, it gets to a third reading. Now this is done on the very next day. So a lot of times, if anyone gives our action alerts now, it will say, call your representative because a piece of legislation is being heard on the floor today. And then all of a sudden the next day, you'll get another email that says, call your representative, this piece of legislation is being heard on the floor today. And you'll say, well, wait a minute, they sent that yesterday, is this a mistake? Well, it's not. Legislation is heard twice on the floor. One in the second reading, and then the very next day on the third reading. Now, what legislators can do if they think a bill is controversial, if they think there might be a lot of public outcry, they'll take it from the second reading to the third reading back to back. So sometimes we don't get that other chance to kind of make our voices be heard, because sometimes they will do a second reading and third reading back to back. But people don't tend to like that, and they get a lot of public outcry when they do that. So they do try to keep it to the 24 hours. But again, the legislation will be heard. They're going to debate the issue. You're going to have questions proposed to the sponsor of the bill, and they can still make amendments. But amendments at this portion of it, the third reading, is actually much more difficult because it takes a 2/3 vote to make any amendments instead of the simple majority. So this does get a little tougher to be able to get an amendment at this time. It does happen, but we tend to not see it. Generally, the second reading wording is the wording.
So when you say it's actually put on the calendar, what they're doing is, are they saying it's going to be the next day? So putting on the calendar means tomorrow.
We normally
Or is it like
get
a week out?
No, we get 48 hours.
You get 48 hours.
So a lot of times you'll see, a lot of times we send out alerts and people go, guys, you don't give us a whole lot of time you don't give us a whole lot of time to really call anyone because, this was heard in a couple days. We only get that much time. We get 48 hours. On amendments, it's 5 o'clock the day before, but with a 2/3 majority vote, they can even accept a late filed amendment. So sometimes if a bill is being heard at 2 o'clock, you may see a late filed amendment at noon. So we're hurrying to get out the information as soon as we can, but sometimes we just don't have as much heads up as we'd like to get it to you guys. So once we get through that third reading, if we've gotten through that entire process and a bill is still alive and still moving, then it has cleared one house, either the Senate or the House, and it goes into messaging to the other house. So this is done through the actual messaging department. There is an actual, just a staff that does messaging, and it goes to the other side. Well, once it goes to the other side, the Speaker of the House or the Senate President can give it committee assignments. They can say, well, yeah, that's great, you start over on my side. It doesn't happen often, but they can do that. If the Speaker of the House likes a bill, but the Senate President doesn't, when it gets over to the Senate, he'll give it committee assignments to make sure that it can't move through the process quickly. But a lot of times they just take up the bill right away. It can go straight to a vote. There's going to be questions, they're going to debate, but the other side can also make amendments. So this bill can change still, even though it's past one side, it can go over to the other side and completely change through amendments. But a piece of legislation has to have the same wording to become a law that has been passed from both the State House and the State Senate. So then we get a return of the bill. The bill returns to the other side that it originated on. If the wording remained the same, then it's considered enrolled and it moves on for governor's consideration. What happens if the wording's different? Well, if the legislation comes back different, there'll be another vote to concur, which basically means that, okay, they did change it, but we'll accept their changes. If they concur, then it passes on, it becomes enrolled, and moves on for the governor's consideration. If the vote to concur fails, if they say, no, we don't like those changes, we're not accepting that, then the legislation is given to a joint conference committee that's made up of House members and Senate members, and they work out the differences. If they can't work out the differences, then instead it does not go on to the governor. But as long as they can work out the differences, there's no more votes made. That's it. They've worked out the differences, and whatever they've mediated on and said is okay is what will be enrolled and go to the governor. So then it goes to the governor's consideration. The piece of legislation the governor has 7 days to consider legislation while the session is open. So this year, from March until May 1st, the governor will have 7 days as soon as it hits his desk to consider the legislation. After May 1st, the governor will have 15 days to consider legislation. So they have 15 days as from when it hits their desk to consider the legislation. If the governor decides to sign it, it goes to the Secretary of the State and becomes law. If he vetoes it, then it gets sent back to the legislature and it does not become law. But what happens if time runs out? Well, a piece of legislation that does not receive the governor's signature still goes to the Secretary of State and becomes a law. What it is, it becomes a law without governor's signature. Last year we had 255 pieces of legislation pass the House and Senate and go for the governor's consideration. He signed 89 of them and vetoed 1. So that means the vast majority of the legislation actually became law without his signature.
Like 99%.
Yeah, quite a bit of them. So that's basically the process. That takes us months and months. We go through this. Our committee schedules are getting quite full. We actually leave again for Tallahassee tomorrow morning. But we have been working on some legislation in the meantime. Did you want to go through it?
Well, let's just see what's first. There he goes.
Okay.
All right, oh, yep, there it is. Oh, no, way back up.
You went too far.
All right, this is what is currently going on,
Go
or
back one.
one more, there's something before
Yeah.
this one?
Yeah, regional planning councils.
All right. The first one is protecting, it has to do with property rights. Has everybody in here heard of regional planning councils? Okay, if you don't know, let me explain what they are. What they are is basically a fourth level of government. Is that what they did is in the 60s, they had these regional planning councils set up all across the state of Florida. There's 14 of them? 11 of them. There's 11 regional planning councils set up across the state of Florida. The initial intent of these regional planning councils was to be able to coordinate activities between the counties. So let's say they were building a really big road that was going to go through counties. Is that council could be there to kind of mediate the process. They could be there to guide them, to offer consulting services for this. Well, they've actually changed. Can you go into how they've changed?
Yeah, what has happened now is that these regional planning councils, over many years of legislation, have been given the right to buy and sell property and to come up with growth plans for the counties, and then basically hold funds from the state and from the federal government from the counties unless they adopt the plan. So basically what they've done is said, this is the plan we have for your county to have growth, and if you don't like the plan, then you're not going to get any transportation dollars, you're not going to get project money, your budget is going to have a shortfall, so you either take our plan or else. And if you still choose not to take our plan, we can buy the property anyways and just do it ourselves. So these have really become a fourth level of government. And it was always, our thinking is consulting between the counties is a great idea. We definitely don't want to see one county have a 6-lane road that bottlenecks into a 2-lane road, because that wouldn't make any sense. Consulting is a good idea. Bribing and mandating is not.
In addition to that, though, they forced the counties to belong to the regional planning councils by law, and that cost them to the tune of
About $100,000 per county.
about $100,000 per county is what they have to give to this regional planning council as well.
In dues.
In dues. So that's your tax money that they're going in there to force them.
Every year?
Every year.
Every
It's
year.
every year, and it's mandated by law. Now, has anyone heard of smart growth? Well, what most people don't know is that what smart growth is that the planning for your county it basically has to make everyone go into these urban centers. So it wants to make cities inside every county, and that urban sprawl wouldn't be something that you would plan for. You would actually want to get your citizens to be into these small cities where they could walk to work, you wouldn't need a car, everything would be right there. So what is mandated from the state now is that every county has to have a plan that emphasizes these urban centers and discourages urban sprawl. So, yeah, go ahead.
Agenda 21?
Yes.
So the state itself is pushing
Yeah.
Agenda 21?
It's mandated. It's mandated through statutes that each county have a growth plan that is a smart growth plan and discourages urban sprawl.
But one thing I did want to mention there, in the entire talk track that we just did, we didn't mention Agenda 21, not one time.
No.
We did that specifically for a reason, though. The reason is that when you go up there and you say the word Agenda 21, every one of them will tell you, no, I'm against
Of
that.
course, I don't want the UN.
I don't
up
want
there.
that. I'm totally against that. It's a cop-out for them. So you have to actually discuss the specific thing
Right.
and make them have to argue the specific thing, because they will as soon as they hear that, they're gonna go, oh, no, I'm against that. They've co-opted that in a weird way.
You know, when we go out to talk to legislators, they'll go, Danielle, of course I don't want the UN to mandate anything to the citizens of Florida. And then you say, yeah, but what about the statute that mandates that a county have a smart growth plan that discourages urban sprawl? You realize that that's part of that plan. Oh, no, it's completely different. And then, but if we don't use terms like Agenda 21 and make them answer to the statutes, then we get some real honest conversations, because they can't give that cop-out of course I don't want the UN involved here. So that we do that on purpose. But yeah, each county, which is something that we are going to be working on for the next session, each county is actually mandated to discourage urban sprawl. But, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, well, on to this piece of legislation though, we do have a bill, we wrote a bill, there's a bill, but the bill that we wrote actually wasn't as good as the bill
That we ended up
and
getting.
Senator Simpson has put a bill forward to eliminate regional planning councils.
Altogether.
Altogether, so
Yeah.
just to get rid of them. And we have a House sponsor as
I
well.
have a commitment for a House sponsor, but she has not officially filed, so I try not to give out names until we
We
have
got
a bill
somebody,
filed.
we have somebody that is looking like they're going to do it.
But I do have a commitment from a House representative that, and she does have a space open for it. So I do have a commitment that she will be sponsoring it in the House, and this will be the complete elimination of regional planning councils.
So, and we'll see what happens. Again, the amendment process, and as you can tell, it's very, very easy to eliminate a piece of legislation. To work it through the landfill that we just described to you is not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to do. But we're going to be able to track it every step of the way, and as you know the process, then we can kind of piecemeal it out. You know, the best way to eat a large piece of steak is one bite at a time. So what we're going to do is take this thing one piece at a time and get it all the way through.
Now, even if we get rid of regional planning councils this year, which we do find to be looked at favorably right now, we still have the issue of the mandate for the discouraging of urban sprawl. So that is something that we have to take on next session, but we had to get rid of regional planning councils first to be able to take on the next fight.
Yeah. All right, so the next one is
Yeah,
you want to do this one?
I can do it.
Okay.
It's the implementation of Amendment 1. Now, I am probably sure every single person in this room was not happy with Amendment 1. It mandates that 33% of documentary stamps go to the purchase of conservation land. Now, currently, the state of Florida owns about 9 million acres within the state already. So that's before we implement Amendment 1. There's 9 million acres of land already being owned by the state for conservation purposes. That doesn't include county buildings, government parks, recreation. That doesn't include any of that. It's 9 million acres of just conservation land, which is about a landmass the size of New Jersey. So that's how much it would be if you put it all together. But we do have Amendment 1. It did pass, and as much as I can guarantee you nobody in this room liked it, we do have to deal with the implementation. So we are working on this. We're trying to mitigate some of the damages that Amendment 1 is going to cause. Currently, I sat in the very first committee meeting for the implementation of Amendment 1, and there was a very interesting presentation being given by the staff of the Environmental Committee. They never knew actually how much money they were spending every year on conservation land. Nobody had ever calculated it before, and nobody had calculated where it was coming from. So because this was passed, they finally had to open up their books and figure out what are we spending and where is it coming from. 33% of documentary stamps this year is going to be $757 million. Currently, they were already budgeted to spend $440 million out of documentary stamps. But they were also budgeted to spend $500 million out of the General Revenue Fund. So they had to spend $750. They were already going to spend $900, but it was just coming out of different funds. So what we're working with legislators, senators, and House reps right now is to try to find the best way to implement this where we're not buying more land. So we're really trying to divert this into, number one, taking the amount down to 750 instead of 900, and then putting that money into rehabilitating land that the state already owns. Out of the 900 million acres that the state owns, much of it is in disrepair. A lot of it already has environmental concerns because of pollution. There's an issue with the Kissimmee River Basin where they took a meandering river and turned it straight. It's flooding the Okeechobee. All of the chemicals from the sugar industry is now not filtering through a meandering river. It's going straight into Lake Okeechobee, overflowing into the Everglades, and actually polluting the Everglades and killing natural estuaries. So what we want to propose is that a lot of this money go into rehabilitating those issues within the state. If you already own land that you're not taking care of, you should not be talking about buying any more land until that's being taken care of. So we're working very hard to make sure that we're diverting as much money as we can into rehabilitation and not the purchase of new land.
Which I will say that while Amendment 1 was very bad and we did not want it to happen, the effect of finding this information out and realizing they were spending more money than this and now being able to box them in is not necessarily a bad thing, and focusing them on actually having to take care of what they have is a good thing as well. But again, what we're dealing with is the best out of a bad situation, which sometimes you have to what we're dealing with in Tallahassee, especially with a constitutional amendment. When something like that passes, there's no getting around it. They can't make a law to change it. It's got to go back on the ballot if they wanted to change it, kind of like they did with high-speed rail over and over again in Florida. But this is also where we want to be up there because it's either us or the environmentalists. There is a wavering opinion up there in Tallahassee. One opinion is close to what we're talking about. There's actually a couple guys up there that are actively talking this same way. And there's other people that literally want to not just spend the money. They want to use this as the bond note to buy as much as they possibly can buy. Like they want to take it on, a loan. Like this money will just be there forever, and the loan and the amount of money would simply pay the interest for the land that they would buy. This is really, really bad because every time they buy land, it lowers the tax rolls even that much more, which raises the taxes on everybody else. Is that every time you give, the government goes out and buys more land, it's a really bad thing. Don't get me wrong. We have to sit there, when we're in this one, we have to sit there and be like, oh, I can't believe we're going to advocate for something like this. But honestly, at this point, because this is one, you got to have somebody up there that at least is able to fight the fight there. And we're not alone. There's other people up there that are making this fight on the good side. And the environmental side doesn't really have a whole lot of things that they can say because we're coming up with a solution. We're saying, all this stuff is bad now. You got to fix this stuff before you can think about buying anything else. That argument is lending itself to be a winning argument up there.
Yeah, even the environmentalists are like, yeah, everything is polluted, let's fix it. So we are getting at least some coalitions built to be able to push that forward.
Question.
Sure.
No matter what your position on Amendment 1, this should not be an amendment to the Florida Constitution.
Oh, I agree.
That's not a constitutional issue.
Right.
So how do we fix that? Does that have to be a vote by
Has
the
to be
voters?
another vote
The
by the
voters have got to
voters.
vote that to take
Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
take away that.
Every time the Constitution is changed. Now, the Constitution does open up every 10 years for a committee appointed by the legislature to be able to make changes. Now, those changes still have to go to a vote for the people. They just get to kind of do it a little easier. But yeah, anytime we change the Constitution, which is something I look very sternly on constitutional amendments, because a lot of these things really should be legislation and not in the Constitution. But once they get put in there, there's no way around it unless we get 60% of the vote to repeal it.
Yep. Next one is Common Core. Now, as it stands right now, there is not a piece of legislation to fight Common Core that has made it through the committees yet. There's things that are being worked on. There's various organizations that are working on legislation to go through. There is one?
Yeah, it just got filed.
Oh, it just got filed.
Yeah.
Go ahead, tell me one.
So there's one piece of legislation, and I've heard that this it's Debbie Mayfield, who Representative Mayfield last year had sponsored the what we kind of dubbed the HALT bill, which would stop the implementation of Common Core for 1 year to study it longer. She does have another piece of legislation out right now that is saying that the high stakes testing hasn't been proven to be successful yet, that we're using a testing system that nobody's ever used before, and that the implementation of the testing should wait 1 year. So she has a halt on the testing. I do hear from her that she does have another piece of Common Core legislation coming out, but it's not written yet, it's still in drafting. So I don't know what the particulars of that legislation will be, but I do know that she does have a piece of legislation that would halt the implementation of the testing for at least a year until it was better tested.
And the one thing that we want to remember about Common Core is, ultimately, we can't fix it until we release the testing from the funding. Right now, these two things are tied. The testing and the funding is tied. So you can give people all the choice in the world that you want to on a county level. You can give them all the choice in the world. But as long as that testing is still tied to that funding, they're going to pick the way that gives them the best opportunity to have high scores on the test to be able to get more money. It's just the way that they're going to do it. We have to fix that part first. So any bill that doesn't address that, while some of them sound really good, if they don't fix that part, then there's nothing that's going to change at the end of the day. These kids are still going to be tied to this. You're going to have teachers that are going to be very angry, students that aren't going to learn very well. You're going to have a lot of problems with what they're doing with Common Core. But we feel that this thing is falling in on itself. It is not a question of if we're going to get rid of Common Core. It really is a question of when. And it is exerting the right pressure. The grassroots has been very successful with this. And this coalition of people that are against Common Core is not only bipartisan, but has a lot of teacher support. Teachers are starting to be on board with getting rid of this as well. So there's some good news in the front, even though legislatively, I don't think that we have as much going on as we'd like to have.
I don't think legislatively we're going to see Common Core getting rid of this year. I think we may see some things to change it. We may see some things that will lessen some of the testing. But the federal government still ties Title I and Title II money to the test. And that takes up about 40% of a school district's budget. So right now we can give them all the choices in the world, but if 40% of their budget is going to disappear, they're going to pick whatever they're being told to pick. It's not a mandate from the federal government. What it is a carrot and a stick. It's you don't have to do it, but if you don't do it, then we're taking away your funding. And that makes it kind of a false choice. You have a choice as long as you choose whatever I want.
Which is the letter of the law is not a mandate, but the spirit of the law, it's a mandate all day long. I mean, I can't think of a better way than a mandate. We're going to beat you if you don't do it.
What we are seeing is that so many teachers and so many parents are frustrated and angry with a very, very expensive curriculum system that the children aren't doing well with. They're taking up so much class time over one single math problem. And parents are getting upset that they're being told not to do first grade math homework with their child. It's starting to fall in on its own weight. People who were never politically active before are starting to say, wait a minute, I don't accept this. So we are going to see some changes. We are going to win on the issue of Common Core. It's just going to be a matter of time.
The next one, which is, I guess, deep in our hearts, we like this one very much.
I like this one.
This is, I don't know if you know this, but there is a large and growing craft brewery industry that is going on in the state of Florida, where a lot of local places that brew their own beer, that are out there selling it, a lot of different companies. The great thing about this is these are all mom and pop places. They're all, it's two people in a dream, husband and wives. Yeah, two best friends. These people are putting their heart and soul into their business, and it's creating a very interesting model in the state of Florida. Now, if you're unaware, and it's weird to bring up something like this, but there is so many good parallels that you can give for the craft brewery industry. Before Prohibition happened, there was thousands of breweries across the country. Everywhere had breweries everywhere. And beers were local. They were not nationwide beers. They were regional beers. They were local beers. That's the way it was. Well, when Prohibition came, it eliminated all of those breweries. And the only ones that could make it are people that had so much infrastructure that they could switch their product to doing something else.
They became wheat growers.
Yeah, wheat growers. Anheuser-Busch, great example of this. Well, as soon as Prohibition was over, then they implemented something around the country called the three-tier system, which means if you're a brewer or a distributor or a bar, you can't be all three. You can only be one.
Right. So they call this the tied house evil, that you could only be either a manufacturer or someone who distributes alcohol or someone who sold it, but you couldn't be any other part of that system. And the reason why is because they thought that you, the consumer, would overconsume alcohol if they were to allow you to buy straight from a manufacturer. So if you bought beer from the person who made beer, you were going to be an alcoholic. But if you bought beer from the person who bought beer from the person who made the beer, you were saved from your impending drunken stupor. All was right in the world. in the 1920s, but it doesn't make much sense today. Now, we're taking on this issue not because we're big beer fanatics, although I did get to visit a lot of craft breweries over the summer, and they do have a phenomenal product. It really is because this is the essence of what we're supposed to be made of. That you and your spouse or your family or your best friend can go and start a business doing something that you love and be successful at it. And you should be able to do that without government intrusion. And right now what we're having is that there is government intrusion that's really trying to push these small mom and pop brewers out of business. What's happening is that they were under what was called a tourist exemption. So they were allowed to brew beer and sell beer because they were promoting tourism. The tourism exemption came into place in the 1960s for Anheuser-Busch because Anheuser-Busch had Busch Gardens and they wanted to brew beer at Busch Gardens and sell you beer at Busch Gardens. And they weren't allowed to do that, so they lobbied the legislature to say, we want to be able to do this. And the legislature said, sure, you own a theme park, we'll let you. So they made this tourism exemption that the craft breweries have been working under. Well, some people in the legislature don't believe that craft breweries are promoting tourism, and they'd like to see them all be in the three-tier system where they would actually have to make their beer, sell their beer to a distributor, and then buy their beer back to be able to sell their own product. So this has been a long-going fight. This is a fight that I did take up last year. This year we are back up there fighting this because the licensing issues for these craft breweries is up in the air. Are they promoting tourism? Do they have to promote tourism? So we're up there fighting this out, not because we think everybody should be drinking beer, but because we feel like this is a great business model that we should be celebrating and not trying to get out of existence.
Not only that, but it highlights cronyism that goes on in the state legislature and how the unintended consequences can create power within one step of that process. It is the distributors that have all the power and control in the process, which is why the distributors gave politicians $900,000 last year, is that they gave them the money in order to preserve the three-tier system because they want to preserve their business model. Now, I'm sure all of you know that one of the most necessary things within free market capitalism is destructive creation, or creative destruction. And that means is that if a product is obsolete or if a way to do things doesn't work anymore, then that will be destroyed by the free market. Not in a negative way where we're going to go with pitchforks and stab somebody, but that we're not going to use that product anymore. Think about Blockbuster, great example of this. I mean, what if Blockbuster could have made legislation to stop Redbox from putting Redbox out there or Netflix from putting Netflix out there? That's in essence what the distributors are able to do. And they are spending a lot of money in order to get that done. So what we're trying to advocate for up there is just to allow these guys to self-distribution within a localized area. Again, we're not going to get everything we want, but we want self-distribution in a localized area and to give these guys a little bit more freedom. That frees up the free market, so eventually we could see the elimination of the three-tier system because we do think that it's a bad system. However, this will be a step that we could take to really have a flourishing market because all of these things create jobs. And all of them are growing and growing and growing, and it's a very networking group of people. Like, they help each other. It's a great kind of, you have big beer companies. And again, I'm a pro-markets guy. I'm not a pro-business guy. I'm a pro-markets guy. I want the consumer to be able to do what the consumer wants to do. But you can't have the big companies lobbying the legislation to keep a competitive advantage. They have to have a competitive advantage because they either create a product better, they put it out logistically better. They have to use those things in order to have their advantage. They're not doing that now, and that's why we're up there fighting.
Are you telling me that Florida doesn't have any microbreweries?
No, they have a ton of them all over the place right now.
But right now, because
Are they
they're
illegal?
No,
they're
well,
well,
not really.
that's the question. Because they're working under a tourism exemption. Now, what the legislature is saying, and what there is a lawsuit in court saying that they are not promoting tourism, so they should not be using that exemption. If that were to win, and they were to say, you know what, these craft breweries are not promoting tourism, they would all have to shut down. So that is why we're up there fighting to fix the licensing issue and to, loosen up the market, because right now, if you open a brewery, you have no idea if you're legally going to be allowed to be in business next year.
The next one.
So, you went past it.
Hold on.
So, the one other big thing that we're working on that kind of helps us fix all of the other issues is campaign finance reform. Because what is happening right now is that, like we were talking about with the brewery industry, we always can see an industry with big business tied to large contributions when they want legislation that goes their way. We saw this with the casino industry when we had the sweepstakes, the ban on the sweepstakes and internet cafes. Normally, the casino industry would donate about $300,000 to $500,000, but the year of the sweepstakes ban, they donated $3 million. So we can always kind of see legislation being tied to big business.
Red light cameras.
Red light cameras. Everyone always asks us, well, why don't we see a red light camera repeal bill every single year up in the state legislature and it never goes anywhere? Why doesn't it move? And I say, well, honestly, because American Traffic Solutions donated $300,000 to just the Republican Party. That's without their donations to every single PAC and their small donation to the Democrat Party. It doesn't move because American Traffic Solutions doesn't want it to.
And the only reason they're giving more money to the Republicans than the Democrats in Florida is because the Republicans are in charge. If it was the other way around and the Democrats held the majority in Tallahassee, then they would give more money to the Democrats. Because those guys don't care about, Democrats or Republicans. They care about who do they got to pay off in order to make sure their stuff
Yeah,
gets passed.
we normally see donations from big business with a 70-30 split, which is exactly the makeup of the Florida legislature. They're 70% Republican, 30% Democrat, and out of every $100,000 that a big corporation donates, 70,000 will go to the Republican Party and 30,000 will go to the Democrat Party. It's literally, they base it on percentages of House makeup, of the legislature makeup. If that switches, then the donations would switch because they don't care about political parties.
Now, the one thing that you probably heard last year when Weatherford and Gates did a media tour talking about campaign finance reform, and they kept being asked the question, or they kept being told, well, there's no way somebody could buy my vote for $500. They kept saying this over and over again. And because the maximum contribution as an individual goes to their offices were $500 at
To
a
their
time.
campaign
To their
account.
campaigns account with $500 at a time. But that was very disingenuous because it didn't tell all the story. Because the rest of the story, again, if all this stuff was in the sunshine, if we had no campaign finance laws whatsoever, and people could give unlimited amounts to whoever they wanted to give it to, as long as it was all public, I don't think we really necessarily have a problem with it. But because we're underneath a certain thing that limits us as individuals, it's got to limit everybody. And that's where the legalized laundering comes in.
Well, what happens right now is that a campaign account, if I'm running for office, I can only take $1,000 per individual, and that also means per company. So if Budweiser or Great Bay Distributing wants to give me money, they can only give me $1,000. But I can open what's called a political committee. That is not my campaign account. It's considered a political committee. I can take unlimited contributions into my political committee. I can control where the money is spent and who the money is spent on, and I don't have to, and if I get the money from the party and not from Great Bay or Budweiser, you wouldn't even know where it came from. So what happens right now is Budweiser or Great Bay Distributing or the gaming industry or whatever, American Traffic Solutions will give hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to the Republican Party and the Democrat Party. Those two parties then take hundreds of thousands of dollars and give it to all of the political committees of incumbents. So Andy Gardner, Steve Crisafulli, all of even Joe Negron, everyone has a political committee. So the parties give it to the political committees, and then the political committees filter it down into other political committees. So this movie's moving down, so you can't trace what big corporation is paying for who. You just know that everybody's got hundreds of thousands of dollars. What also happens is someone like Andy Gardner, who is the Senate president, ran unopposed. So he got $3 million into his political committee that he didn't need because he wasn't running. So what he did is go out and buy consultants for all of his friends. They got high-powered consultants. He had one expense line on his report that said ABC Consulting. We have no idea who benefited from that expense, but lots of people did. And what he also did was donate $278,000 to Thad Altman's political committee. So when we see these politicians say, well, I can't be bought for $1,000, well, of course not, nobody could. That would be ridiculous. But you probably could have been bought for $278,000, which is exactly what you received.
Now this, a lot of times we have different people that we work with. Matter of fact, this kind of originated from the Republican Liberty Caucus. Florida. I don't know if you know who the Republican Liberty Caucus is, but they're one of the one of the Republican organizations here in the state of Florida, headed up by a gentleman by the name of Bob Blight. Now Bob brought this, and he said, I'd really like to push this piece of legislation. So we're pushing this piece of legislation because we do believe in it. We do believe that it's a good thing to do. It does solve a lot of problems. Now, when it comes to, this is one of those ones where it is hard to find a sponsor for these bills. But we have some people in the mix right now on the House and on the Senate side that are going to be proposing this piece of legislation. But we don't want to make it pie in the sky to think that there's just no way that that this thing is going to be passing this year. More than likely, this is going to be the first of several years in order to get something like this put out there. But we definitely want to make sure that we let people know about it because it's. Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
What is the proposal? I mean, I know
yeah,
what
yeah.
it is now, but what are you proposing?
So what the proposal is that we're going to limit contributions between political committees. We're trying to eliminate them completely, that political committees could not donate to each other, but we would compromise on allowing that to be just the maximum of $1,000 contribution. If you as an individual are maxed out at 1,000, then the political committee should be maxed out at 1,000. That a legislator or candidate could not have their name or have anything to do with a political committee. So Andy Gardner could not sit on a political committee and say, pay this person, pay this person, pay this person. That it would be a completely separate entity from any candidate or campaign. And that gifts will have to be disclosed. If you're getting a hunting trip on King Ranch, then you're going to have to say that you got a hunting trip on King Ranch. So there's a lot of, we're not getting rid of political committees. We're eliminating the laundering that's going on.
And if you look at that piece of paper that I left with you right there, that has a lot of the information on it.
Okay, so this is once it gets into the political committees that you can't do transfer. What are you doing about taking money from the Republican Party into the original committee?
They would also be limited to the campaign maximum,
be in
which
the-
is $1,000.
Okay, and how about transparency in the money going into the parties?
Well, the parties already have to say who's contributing to them. And as long as they're not contributing to each other, you would be able to see that it's Budweiser, it's American Traffic Solutions. They do have to report that now.
Okay.
What we also have is a provision that an expense has to be tied to the person benefiting that expense. So if Andy Gardner's political committee had an expense for consulting that Thad Altman benefited from, that would have to be reported that it went for Thad Altman.
Good.
Transparency, I think, is the big key there.
When you say Republican Party, are you talking about RPOF?
Yes.
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 And it's probably the one thing you want to say is, well, they have been barred specifically from getting involved in primaries because they want the electorate to be able to make the decision, not the establishment or the leadership. And this is how they're getting around that.
Yeah.
That they are getting around this. And this, again, this is not. It's the same thing for the Democrats. It'd be the same
Everybody
either way.
uses them.
They
But
both use
but
them.
RPOF has a different leadership now,
Yeah.
not tied so much to Tallahassee, so I guess we'll see how that falls out.
We would now.
Which is also probably why the Senate side took their money out.
Yeah, and now Blaze has said that he believes in making sure incumbents win re-election. This is a tool that the party has been using to make sure incumbents win re-election. He may be in favor of changing it. I haven't sat in his office and proposed the legislation to him, but I'm not sure how that will go. But this is something that has been going on they used to be called ECOs, COEs. It was a CCE, Committee of Continuous Existence. Everybody was upset with those. So Will Weatherford and Senate President Gates said, well, let's just get rid of them, which they did. But what they did was change the name to Political Committee.
So is Integrity Florida working with you on this?
No.
That's not their issue?
No, well, that is their issue, but they are not attached with this one in any way, shape, manner, or form.
Someone from Integrity Florida did help with some of the writing of the legislation.
Correct, but I gotta make sure I say
Yeah.
up front that integrity.
They're not part of the coalition, but they did help with writing of some of the legislation.
Does what we're doing in Florida parallel the federal, McCain-Feinstein?
No, it's a little different. In the federal government, they actually have PACs and super PACs, which has a no collusion law already. So a candidate cannot be the person on the PAC, but they can have representation on the PAC and things like that, but they can't be the one that oversees the PAC on a federal level.
Yeah. And the other thing is, money is always gonna be involved in politics in one shape, way, manner, or form, until we are able to beat the money. There are candidates and races in the state of Florida that have been up 10-1, 20-1, even 100-1 on the money side, and have beat the money. They did it because they got out there, they got their message out there, and they did very, very well with that. All we're trying to do with this kind of legislation is to stop as much of the laundering as we possibly can, because we figured that the laundering of it is probably, it's not helping, it's absolutely hurting. But at the end of the day, in order to get grassroots candidates elected into office, it requires a grassroots movement
You have to
to
even
get those
the playing
people in office, because that's what evens the playing field.
We beat the money.
Yeah, we did.
It does happen.
Oh, it happens. It's not.
Jennifer Sullivan, she beat it.
Yep,
Yeah,
she beat the money.
She did.
She absolutely did. And we can do that over and over again. That process is repeatable. So it's good to see that that's going on. And now the next part comes into play is to make sure that the person that you bring up there, that you get elected that way, that you have to hold them, your real work for holding them accountable starts now. It's getting them up there is the hard part, but then the next part, which is hard as well, is to keep those people the same way. We were helping a candidate that won an election in a primary, and we saw firsthand what they're gonna do, what they do, and they make it sound so nice and sweet. They really do. Like, we like you. We just kind of want you to play ball with us.
We
for a
think
little
your
bit before you
ideas
do.
are greatly needed up in Tallahassee. And if you help us with these issues that you completely disagree with, then we'll start to talk about these issues that are important to you.
It's called principle.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
absolutely. And it's also, you have to go with the one philosophy that, politicians are like diapers. They need to be changed often
For the same reason.
for the same reason.
Yeah.
So our plan for 2015, that goes into all the different legislation that we're focused on. Now, I want to make sure we make one other thing kind of clear. We play offense and defense when we go up there. This is kind of our offense stuff, but the defense stuff is not dictated as much by us. It is by what is going on up in Tallahassee. So we are watching a lot of other things that are going on in Tallahassee, but you can only have so many offensive battles going on at one time, and these are the ones that we really kind of picked this year. One of the ways in which we picked them, though, just so you know, is on your desk is something called a constituent survey. Checkboxing the ones that are the issues that are important to you are kind of the stuff that we will look at first when it comes to each session. The reason why is we work, but we aren't effective unless there's a lot of people in the grassroots that are motivated by an issue that are going to be wanting to call on an issue. Like, if you don't drink beer, more than likely if I say, hey, call for the beer thing, you're gonna be like, I don't really drink beer, I don't really care. Which, that's your business. Second Amendment, I'm calling all day long. So, we try to do things along those lines in order to make sure that we can be the most effective as we can be. So while we're up in session, when session starts, we're gonna be doing a lot of nightly video updates, just a couple minutes, just to kind of let you know what's going on. Calls to action, the calls to action get a little bit long, but the action itself can be a pretty easy action, but like I said, we try to give you all the information up front. Representation in committee meetings. We're gonna be up at all the committee meetings.
Speaking at one tomorrow.
Matter of fact, she's speaking at one tomorrow. Proactive legislation, which we kind of went over today. Faster reactions and defensive actions. Last year we weren't up in Tallahassee the entire time, which did make it to where our defensive actions were not as quick. We're going to be up there a lot more this year, and so we're going to make sure that we have the defensive actions coming out a lot quicker. And then action days in Tallahassee. If you actually want to come up to Tallahassee, we do publish our calendar of when we're going to be up there. So you can look at the entire month, and if you want to come up there, you can say, hey, I'd like to come up to town, I'd like to come to Tallahassee, go with you guys and see what you guys are doing. Or we're going to have a specific day where everybody can go if they want to go. But, to try to make sure that to help you guys out as much as possible, maybe you like this and you're like, man, I'm really interested in this kind of thing. I want to see more about it. You can come up with us to Tallahassee, you can see what goes on, you can see how we're going around with these representatives. And then, make sure you just bring a little barf bag with you because you might puke in your mouth a couple times when you see these guys. But other than that, we try to help out a lot on that stuff. And we do, the only way that we work is via donations. So there's a couple ways that you can donate. The first one is you can make a one-time or a reoccurring donation at our website, which is libertyfirstfl.org. At the top right corner, there's a button that says donate. You can also become a member. Member is...
It's $10 a month recurring donation.
Yeah, $10 a month recurring donation, and you can become a member, and you get a little card and all that kind of stuff. And that's libertyfirstfl.org, same website. You also can call us up and make a donation over the phone, but don't do it right now because we're
my
here.
phone is silent.
Phone number 727-424-9530. You can also mail it in. which is 9851 State Road 54, Newport Richey, Florida, 34653. By the way, everything that was in this slide is in that piece of paper, or in that packet right there, so I left you guys with one. That was the presentation and everything.
Does
Is there
anyone
any
have
questions?
Sure.
How many grassroots organizations do you have in Florida that's supporting you now?
Well, financially supporting
Yeah.
we have about 5 that send us monthly donations. We have a couple other organizations that will send us large amounts for the year and things like that. We really work on a shoestring budget,
I know.
and because of that, which is why last year we didn't have as
But
many.
you have more than 10 organizations supporting you.
Yeah, we
Well-
have individuals from much more than 10 supporting us.
Yeah, there are some specific organizations that actually do cut us checks.
Right.
Right.
Like
I
the
know.
RLC cuts us checks. Matter of fact, we just got one from,
The
it's here.
North Lake Tea
Yeah,
Party,
North
Yeah.
Lake, for we just were out there.
the North Central Florida
North
Tea
Central
Party,
Florida Tea Party. We've
the
gotten from
Southwest
there.
Florida Citizens Alliance
Yep.
used to send us.
Yeah, used to send us some.
So I mean, we have, and Stop Common Core Coalition sent us money last
Yeah.
year. They did one big donation.
C4L.
Oh yeah, Campaign for Liberty also.
So I know what you don't know what your budget is until you know what's come in, but what does it cost? What is your average cost during this time of the year when you're doing all the committee meetings and in session?
Without any of us getting paid, which right now we don't, we're up there just, at this point, everything's going to expenses. But expenses alone is about $150 a day for every day we're there. So this
Per
week,
purse?
no, that'll be for 2 of us to be up there. But that's $150 a day. We try to get up there at least twice a week during session. We'd like to get up there 3 times a week, but that means we're spending $300 every single week, and that's just expenses. That's just to get us in a room, to have food for the couple days, and whatever office supplies and printing supplies that we need.
Yeah,
And
and
gas.
there's other costs that go along with it, but I mean, it's one of these things where I guess the way I look at it is the more that we're able to go out here and talk to people, which means the more money that we're able to bring in, which means the more stuff we're going to be able to do when we go up there. And I don't think we've even remotely scratched the surface when it comes to how many different groups we could be going out in Florida. As a matter of fact, session's getting to be pretty heavy. So for the next 2 months, so for pretty much the rest of February, for March, and for April, we're going to be spending a lot of time in Tallahassee and not nearly as much time out going places. As soon as the session's over, what we're going to do is to really recommit to hitting every organization that we could possibly hit from June until November. Is that to really grab and go to every place that we could possibly go to. Because, look, there's probably at least 200 different groups around the state that you can go to, at least 200. And a lot of times it's groups of a dozen, 15 people that get together that want to be able to do this stuff. And so we want to go out there and really, we don't want you to make a new group. We just want to give you information that you can use or not use. It really is up to you guys whether you use the information or not. What we really try to do is to bring it to you from a very clinical, nonpartisan perspective. A lot of times when you're listening to some of this presentation, I always get a little bit weirded out because it almost sounds like we're promoting or supporting something. You know, it's not like politicians like us, but we're not going to come in here and tell you how bad they are necessarily. We're just going to say, this is what they're doing up there. If you like that, then, more power to you. But if you don't, then...
We're not politician specific, we're just issue specific. So, we're nonpartisan. I don't care which party they come from. If they do the right thing, then I'm going to thank them. If they do the wrong thing, then I'm going to let you know.
Yeah, Matt, one of the funny things was that nobody gave, we wouldn't, from August till November of 2014, we didn't put anything out for 3 months. And a couple people asked me questions like, well, how are we not putting anything out? You should tell us about the politicians right now. That's not our business. We're not involved in the
Election?
There's 2 different sessions. You have campaign season and you have legislative season. Well, in campaign season, there tends to be a lot of disagreement with people when it comes to candidates. So instead of getting involved in that kind of discussion, we just figured for Liberty First, we'd give you the information, and then you can choose what you want to do with it. Like we did a scorecard last year where we scorecarded all the representatives. Now, unfortunately,
Most of them fail.
most of them failed. And we listed why they failed. We listed each one of the bills and how you got your points, if you got good points or bad points. And we're going to do that again this year. But all we're going to do is that part because, again, it's one of these things where I'm not going to get involved in campaign season, at least in this aspect. I'm only going to, this organization is only involved in the legislative side, not in the campaign side. You had a question?
Right. it sounds so difficult to get anything actually through.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you can brag about that you saw from the beginning to the end and it actually made it through?
Yes, I can actually. 2 years ago, we had the Freedom from Unwarranted Surveillance Act. And what that would be is, everyone knows what a drone is, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, drones also have imaging software, and what was unclear is if police could use that to collect evidence or to basically look on every citizen's property without a warrant. Now, if they were a person or if they had a camera in their hand, they wouldn't be allowed to, but the police departments were saying that they can fly a drone and there was no regulation. So we went through and did the Freedom from Unwarranted Surveillance Act, which would make it to where no matter if they used a drone with any kind of imaging or anything that would collect evidence on you, that they would need a warrant just like they would need if they were doing it in person. So that is one that we saw from the beginning to the end. We got it through. A lot of our defensive measures seem to work. Does everyone know what an RFID chip is?
Yeah.
Well, an RFID chip was being proposed to be put into all of our driver's licenses. And what that would do is make that your information very insecure. If you have an RFID reader, you can actually read every person's information in here if you had that chip in your license. Well, one of our lobbyists, Paul Henry, found that amendment and went to the committees and said, listen, you know, you're about to put RFID chips in every single license in Florida. This is why it's bad. This is what it's going to do. And that amendment was pulled out immediately. So a lot of the things that when we're defensive, we almost always win on the issue. If we take it up, they wanted to make changes to stand your ground. As soon as we got involved, it stopped moving completely. But on the offensive stuff, just recently, the most recent one was the Freedom from Unwarranted Surveillance Act. And it does look like this year we're at least going to get a lot of conversation on the ending of the regional planning councils, and that may be something we have another win at the end of the year.
Well, I know I'm going to sound like a Cubs fan in spring training right now. But I will say, this year, the legislators have been more receptive.
Yeah.
Now, how they are now and how they vote at the end of the day, probably going to be a different story. But at least it looks better right now. It looks for at least an engaging conversation. It looks like they're trying to do things, like they heard the will of the people on some stuff, and they are trying to move. I think that some of them do feel that their jobs are going to be up in 2016, and they realize that there's a lot more people up there looking at what they're doing right now, so they better do the right thing. There's a lot more people that are very angry. They get a lot of phone calls for anger, and they had a luxury last time. 2014, they had a luxury. Their luxury was they only had 80 of them had no competition whatsoever, which means the grassroots didn't compete against them, which means that the other party didn't compete against them. Some of them had some other opposition, but it was mostly write-in candidates, and the write-in candidates are just not going to be able to get anything done for the most part. It's like one write-in that's ever won ever, or two.
In Pennsylvania.
Yeah, one in Pennsylvania, one in Alaska. But with that being said, how they're acting now seems to be a good sign. And I would say that we've adjusted somewhat in our approach to how we go talk to these politicians. Because I would rather just go up there and yell. I would rather just yell and scream at them and tell them they're bad and all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't get anything done at the end of the day. Which also means that they do most of the talking and I just kind of sit back and take it for as long as I can, but I kind of feel like I'm on a bull sometimes, just waiting now 8 seconds so I can get off because these guys just offend me. But we do see at least a little bit of a change going on up there. We'll see what happens, and we're gonna. If they do good, we'll say they did good. They did bad, we're gonna say they did bad. Again, I would rather them all get removed. But again, I'd rather just tell you the truth though, because it's not up to me whether they get removed. It's up to the citizens on whether they get removed. Any more questions?
Is it just the two of you?
No.
No. It's myself. The lobbyists go Danielle, Paul Henry, he does a lot of real ID and transportation issues.
Up here on the right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Danielle, John, Paul, Adrian Wiley. I don't know if you knew who Adrian Wiley is. He ran last time for governor.
Libertarian.
Yeah, that guy. We got Adrian that goes up there. There's a gentleman by the name of TJ who does a lot of our marketing on the back end, and then you have myself that are directly.
Justin and Julian do a lot of our research.
Oh yeah, Justin and Julian do a lot of the research. Justin is a gentleman that lives down, a college student that lives down in Pasco County, and Julian is actually Adrian's running mate was a gentleman by the name of Greg Rowe, and that's Greg's wife,
Yeah.
is who does a lot of those things when it comes to that. And then those are the people that are immediately kind of involved with Liberty First. And then what we have is other people out there that are kind of just take the information that we give and then they give it out to all of their different people. A lot of times, like Catherine Bear with the Tea Party Network kind of fits the bill that way. A couple other people out there, but it's not really big. What we really need is about 30 lobbyists up in Tallahassee. If you ever go up there for a day and you see what's going on in the hallways, like you realize that, wow, I'm glad that we're up there. I do see the need to have a lot more people up there than just us.
For the organization, as small as it is, we get a lot accomplished. We have been on the defense on a lot of different issues that we've won on almost all of them. So we're 4 lobbyists up against 3,000, and we tend to always win. So on the issues that we can take up, but because we're only 4 lobbyists, we can only take up so much at a time.
Any other questions? Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.